Hello, welcome to Jazz Is
Jazz's
Masterclass series
at the National Jazz Museum at the National Jazz Museum in Harlem.
I am Sekou McMillan, the curator of special projects.
My name is Albert Marquez, Zach O'Farrell.
My name is Shirazette Titten.
And we are in conversation with the legendary Bertha Hope.
Jazz could only have happened here in America.
The key to everything was the radio.
So this world is too dense. 15 minutes isn't enough to cover it all.
Are you ready? I am.
Walking through Harlem was a whole nother ballgame. I mean, it was nothing to see. I'll use Miles Davis. Yeah, there's Miles Davis.
Welcome to Jazz Is, a masterclass series for the National Jazz Museum in Harlem. My name is Talia Castro-Pozo, and we are in conversation with Joe Conzo Sr., an author, archivist, and Latin music historian. Wonderful to have you.
Thank you.
Tell us about those days. What was it like in Harlem, the jazz in Harlem, the club scene?
Well, as far as the club, Harlem was great. Don't forget, Harlem was divided. But if you talk about Harlem per se, Black Harlem was forgettable. You had clubs all on Lenox Avenue. You had the Cotton Club, you had Savoy Ballroom, you had Small's Paradise, and the Apollo. And the advantage of jazz per se, or the musicians, you got to see them. They walk around, they were very accessible. Not like today where all these celebrities, which I will not name, but they walk around with bodyguards, with, which was unheard of. The public made these celebrities. And it was nothing to see Sugar Ray Robinson, the former middleweight champion of the world. He had a club called Sugar Ray. You could stand outside the Apollo Theater. You could run into Ella Fitzgerald, Duke Ellington. They'd say hello to you, and they'd sign your autograph. And then you had Billie Holiday, But not only that, the black celebrities, you had the white celebrities. The Savoy Ballroom hosted Glenn Miller. They hosted Benny Goodman. I mean, these were accessible. And the Savoy Ballroom had Machito, the first Afro-Cuban band located in Harlem, in Spanish Harlem. Don't forget, Harlem was divided.
What about the Cotton Club? You mentioned the Cotton Club.
Cotton Club was famous because of its review, and you had Duke Ellington, you had different celebrities, Lena Horne in there, but they weren't allowed to go in the front. They were only allowed to come into the back, unlike the other clubs.
Right, so the segregation.
The segregation. And it was run by Oni Madden, which was part of Dutch Schultz's crowd, the Irish Mafia, not the Italian Mafia as we know it today. And, you had Bumpy Johnson, you had Spanish Raymond, but these were number guys,
Was it different for you as an audience member or someone who wanted, how was it to be there at the Cotton Club in that segregation?
Unfortunately, I was still young. I never got to go to the Cotton Club. I did go to the Savoy Ballroom, Small's Paradise. Things were accessible. Walking through Harlem was a whole nother ballgame. I mean, it was nothing to see. I'll use Miles Davis. Yeah, there's Miles Davis. There's Thelonious Monk, which I've had run-ins with them because of Tito Puente. But the point is, these were things that were accessible. And Harlem was that way,
Instead of watching TV, people will go to the clubs.
Well,
right?
there was no TV.
There was
the
no
radio.
TV. It was the radio, right? The radio, exactly.
It was the radio.
So, imagine.
And you got to learn on the radio. The radio showcased Alan Freed in the late 40s, early 50s. The jazz clubs, Make Believe Ballroom by Martin Block. That's what Tito always said. Tito Puente said he learned by the radio. And most musicians learn by the radio by listening to Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Tommy Dorsey, Jimmy Dorsey. And we could go on and on. Those are the big bands. And those big bands played in Harlem. Yeah.
Amazing times, huh?
Great times, great times. And when we talk about other times, when you talk about the brown and the black of Harlem, which we'll get into later on, that became a whole nother ballgame, especially me growing up, you know, because I'm a product of Harlem, like Tito Puente was, you know, so very interesting. And you think back at those times, and those were good times. With a lot of respect.
So you would say violence was not part of the daily life of Harlem?
No. I mean, you had your guy wants to stick up somebody or something like that. But most people knew each other. The neighborhoods were that way. Everybody knew so-and-so. Oh, that's Talia's son. That's Talia's daughter. That's so-and-so. They knew each other because there were times you would leave the doors open. I'd stop into your house and you'd say, "Oh, Joe, what is it? Could I get a glass of water or milk or something?" It was nothing because the door was open all the time. There was no air conditioning. The fire escape was our air conditioning. And Tar Beach, the roof was our beach.
Amazing. Great times.
Loved it. But, you know, the schools were that way. You learned in the schools. You learned, you know, boys and girls schools. One thing I would tell you, there was no bilingual education in those days. If you came from parents that spoke Spanish, you spoke Spanish in the house. You learned English in the school. And you were forbidden to speak English in the house. I mean, you can on and off with your sister, your brother, but mostly everything was the conversation was in Spanish. And your parents were strict with that. You learn English in school and you learn Spanish in the house. That's why it was very important education-wise and culturally in those days. You learned about your culture. The radio would play music. Would play jazz. You had a station that played jazz. You had a station that played little light music from the country you came from. And you had doo-wop. You know, that's how Harlem was. And there was no regulation. You can walk down the street and listen to music because even the stores had the speakers outside and you would listen to the same music. And they would sell records, 78s.
Wow. Well, we'll get into your collection of music later too. Pretty amazing topic.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, Joe, how do you think all that integration, everything that we're talking about, affected jazz?
Well, as we talked about later on, we'll get into how it really affected most musicians, jazz musicians or Latin musicians. They were always looking for experimentation. And then in 1947, which I don't want to jump the gun, but it was there. You know, the conga drums didn't come about until the late 40s and 50s. But it affected musicians. Mario Bowser was a perfect example. He played with Chick Webb. He came from Cuba. These musicians came from the islands, from Puerto Rico, from Cuba. And they wanted to integrate and use certain harmonies that jazz had with their harmonies. And that's how it started to get integrated. And later on, as you we could talk about it, the person that really wanted to integrate everything was a guy like Dizzy Gillespie. And he spoke to Mario Bowser. I want to do something with the tom-toms. They used to call them tom-toms. These are the conga drums. Mario Bowser said, "I got a guy for you." His name was Luciano Chano Pozo.
Hmm.
So in 1947, he came from Cuba. Didn't speak a word of English. And the rest is history, because they would talk to each other. He would tell Dizzy, Dizzy used to imitate him, because Dizzy, I'm going to do this. And Dizzy would say, he got it. Then they would ask other musicians to write the music for certain parts. And of course, the biggest tune was called Manteca.
Manteca.